I've always focused on gut health because most of our immune cells and our defense system is in our gut. And so the importance of having a good gut barrier function, just a good gut function, is a strong indicator that your immune health is doing well. In this conversation, we get into so much nuance and so much discussion about the conversation of fecal matter transplants, the gut microbiome, how to support the gut, what is the gut, and what is the microbiome, and how should we really support it? What does antibiotics do to it, and much more. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private functional medicine practice where we focus on root cause healing. And it often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Sabine Hazan. She is the author of Let's Talk SHIT. And we talk about the impacts of the gut microbiome. We talk about fiber a little bit. We talk about pH waters or alkaline waters. We talk about what impacts the gut, how to strengthen the microbiome, what probiotics do, and what we should really do to support our overall immune function that, again, is mostly in our gut. You'll see that this is more of a conversation rather than here are the solutions or here are the tactical things we can do. She does talk about four main culprits or four or five main culprits that impact our microbiome, and especially the Bifido strain that she talks a lot about. I hope that you listen to this conversation, especially if you're suffering from gut health imbalances, and then it gives you ideas or levers to possibly consider to overall get your health back to resilience. Because the goal should always be that we get to resilience and that our body is strong enough to protect us from whatever is going out or going on in the external world. Let's get right into the interview. Hi, Dr. Hazan. I'm so excited, as I told you just right now, but I'm a huge fan after watching your talk at the ILADS conference and your focus on gut health and really just making sure that our gut health is the most robust at a conference where they sort of love using antibiotics for Lyme. I loved it. But for the people that may not know you, if you can introduce yourself.
So I'm a gastroenterologist by trade. I started doing clinical trials decades ago. That's kind of how I got into GI. My first year of research at University of Florida, being the first woman to be accepted at University of Florida. So I started off with research, and I started doing like basically 20% research, 80%, and then over the years, with kids, husband who's a cardiologist, it's not so easy to do GI calls and everything. So I kind of transferred more into clinical trials for pharma, bringing drugs to market years ago, without saying the, because I'm getting old. And Dr. Stolman, who was my fellow and he was a senior to me at University of Miami. When I was a first year GI fellow and I was presenting on visceral hyperalgesia, he took me around these posters and he said, the future is in sh.t. And that's how he called it. And I'm like, please don't make me play with poop. If I see poop in the colon, I usually tell the patient, go re-prep, come back the next day. I really didn't want to play with that, right? But what happened is I was doing clinical trials for pharma for a condition, disease or bacteria called C. diff, Clostridium difficile, which is a bacteria that you get from like taking a lot of antibiotics. And then what happened was one of my patients was a doctor. And so my trend was always treat the patient with the common antibiotics that we knew, flagyl, vancomycin. And then if that didn't help, then I would put the patient through clinical trials. And then through clinical trials, if they didn't respond, I would do fecal transplant for them, right? And I would use the funds that I would get from pharma to test their product to use towards doing fecal transplant on these patients. Because you can imagine doing fecal transplant in Beverly Hills is not very cheap, right? So what happened is I started doing fecal transplant and then I seeing different things. Alzheimer's improving in one guy, skin conditions improving, GI disorders like that were not really C. diff, like irritable bowel syndrome. Various things improved and then started on this path of really asking questions, right? Like, why did my patient with Alzheimer's, all I did was give him the wife's microbiome? Why is he all of a sudden remembering something, right? And so what happened is over this path, then all of a sudden on my desk, I get clinical trials from pharma of fecal material in capsules. And I got fecal material in capsules from different companies. And I look at these protocols, I'm like, wow, we're in the sh.t business and we have no idea what the hell we're doing or why even feces worked or helped. Like, what did they change? What happened in Alzheimer's that might, what bacteria changed, right? And so that was the beginning. That was the beginning of going from clinical trials for pharma to going for clinical trial for me to understand the microbiome, for me to understand what I was doing with fecal transplant. And then, here we are, COVID hits, and I have a genetic sequencing lab that analyzes the microbiome. I have a CRO, which is a clinical research organization that does clinical trials for pharma. And I'm a clinician on the front line. So I said, who better than me with all my associates and my colleagues? I'm friends. Because I stepped into this asking questions, I became friends with all my colleagues that are basically, gastroenterologists at Mayo Clinic, at Harvard, at, MD Anderson, at, Brown University. So all these academicians started talking, and we all started talking. We even created the Malibu microbiome meeting to discuss our cases publicly, to ask the questions. What are we seeing? Sahil Khanna at Mayo Clinic was basically seeing chronic urinary tract infections improving, right? So what are we seeing? Colleen Kelly at Brown University was seeing, improvement of alopecia areata. So when you see all this and you ask questions and you say, we really need to understand this, but there's no funding, nobody's funding the microbiome research. So I basically started the Malibu microbiome meeting. I started the biome squad, recruiting scientists and doctors that knew about the microbiome, started the Microbiome Research Foundation, and started Progenobiome to understand the microbiome. So here we are. I started off as a GI doctor, to clinical research for pharmaceutical companies, to now spearheading a genetic sequencing lab that's doing 58 clinical trials on the microbiome and diseases and everything. So it's a bit of a hurricane when COVID hit. And I remember I was the girl that was bringing drugs to market for pharmaceutical companies, right? So I was getting paid very nicely by pharmaceutical companies to just bring these drugs to market. When COVID hit and I noticed that the vaccine killed the Bifidobacteria in the microbiome is when I kind of like stepped away and I had to speak up. And, it wasn't to my benefit. Let's put it that way. There's still companies that are using me for clinical trials because they're pretty legit. But, the big companies, they like doctors that just follow a certain path, and I'm just not that doctor. So I've gone from a gastroenterologist to a rogue physician. So I think that's the best way to describe myself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. There's so many questions that I want to ask in that, but I'm going to just start with the microbiome. You talked about how it's a garden and how we should care for it. What do you mean by it's a garden?
So the microbiome is really, so when we look at our poop, right? And the reason I wrote the book, Let's Talk sh.t, is because of the fact that I wanted to call it what it is. Okay, what are we talking about when we talk about microbiome? Because I can tell you my mother didn't know. She's like, what does that mean, microbiome? It's a beautiful word to basically talk about microbes, right? It's an accumulation of microbes. If you think about the Garden of Eden, right? If you think about what the Garden of Eden represented, it was a beautiful, luscious garden full of fruits, full of vegetables, full of microbes, really, right? I mean, when you think about how gardening occurs, it's fertilizer, you have to remove the weeds, you have to put in fertilizer, you have to have sun, you have to have water, the bees play a role in the gardening. So that's what the microbiome is. It's really that, to me, it's like that Garden of Eden that should be, preserved, that should be maintained. It's this beautiful garden that you get as a newborn, full of new microbes, and then you start exposing yourself to other microbes, and little by little you develop an immunity, right? The exposure. So you start off with a lot of good microbes, bifidobacteria, that you get from breastfeeding from mom, and hopefully being delivered vaginal delivery. And then through life, through exposure to grandpa, grandma, sick brothers, kindergarten, kids with school sick, you accumulate a bunch of microbes, and your defense is really the good microbes, but they kind of keep those bad microbes in check, right? So it's that balance. It's the same thing in a garden, right? You're not going to put just good microbes. You're also going to mix it up with some bad microbes. Think about what we do when we compost, right? We're putting old foods, remnants, we're putting green, leaves and grass, and then we mix it up, and then we end up with this beautiful dirt, right? It's the same thing, really.
So at the iLabs conference, obviously we use antibiotics and there's certain life-saving situations, but
Yes.
we will use it oftentimes for Lyme and for long periods. Sometimes I think the iLabs, I think their recommendation is at least 30 days, right? And then some people it's years. And so what are your thoughts of that?
Yeah, so if you look at C. diff, right, Clostridium difficile, you cannot do fecal transplant without killing the bug first, right? So what are we doing in fecal transplant? We're giving patients vancomycin or fidaxomicin or flagyl. And basically, what are we doing? We're killing the microbiome. We're removing the weeds, right? To go back to my garden.
Mm-hmm.
And then what are we doing when we're giving a new microbiome? We're reimplanting new seeds, right? So it's the same process with Lyme, right? You've got the tick, you've got the Borrelia, you've identified it by various ways, and it's there. So what are you going to do? You're going to try to kill that, right? Now, not every antibiotic is toxic to the microbiome, is going to affect the microbiome, but you need to kind of kill off the bug first, because short of doing fecal transplant, it's not reasonable to do fecal. I mean, it would be a good idea to do fecal transplant in Lyme disease. However, it's not feasible, right? Because you have to start doing the clinical trials. You have to start showing that it actually improves. You have to have good markers that are acknowledged by infectious disease doctors that say, yes, we agree this is a good marker for Lyme disease. And, Lyme in itself is controversial. Everything in medicine these days is controversial, sadly. So if you look at that and you say, okay, well, we have some good labs out there that are testing for Lyme. We trust these labs to tell us this. We trust the symptoms of the patients. You have to treat, right? It's like a pneumonia. It's like chronic urinary tract infections. The problem, and as I said at iLabs, maybe I'm the missing link, is that we do not know how long to treat for. We're not really following the markers, right? So we have the ability in the stools to look at these microbes, right? So we could see the spirochetes phylum, okay? So if a patient comes in brand new ticks, it's in the stools, we see it, we say, okay, let's treat, we know that it's eradicated, and then we know how to restore the microbiome. But here's the thing, there's some people that are exposed to ticks never get Lyme. Right. Why is that, right? Are they resilient? Do they have a strong enough microbiome? Kind of what we saw with COVID. People that are exposed constantly to COVID are not catching COVID. Why is that? Well, we noticed in our papers that they had higher bifidobacteria, higher faecalibacterium. They had the higher faecalibacterium, higher bifido, lower Bacteroides, and higher diversity. So that became kind of the marker of, hey, maybe that's what immunity looks like, right? In a person to survive COVID. Maybe that's what immunity looks like in a person that survives Lyme disease. Definitely with Lyme disease, we discovered that loss of bifidobacteria was a big player. Now, that loss of bifidobacteria, and you heard me say this, could be secondary to the treatment, or it could be from the microbe that came in and just ravaged the gut, right? Or it could be the stress of the microbe that got in, right? Or the symptoms that occurred with that microbe. So there's various things that can kill the bifidobacteria. I think, the future of Lyme disease is going to be focusing on bifidobacteria, focusing on how do we increase that bifidobacteria? What drugs, what vitamins, what nutraceuticals, what foods can we give to increase the bifidobacteria? And at the same time, what can we stop doing that kills the bifidobacteria? And it's kind of funny because I'm on Twitter and, I have all these followers, and every time I post about bifidobacteria, there's always a bunch of people that are asking me, well, how do we improve our guts? Right. And I always say, it's a loaded question, okay? Because we're at the beginning of research, okay? What we're trying to attempt with my lab, with my clinic, is writing a protocol, the Hazen protocol, call it, that is basically about the foods that you should avoid. Because remember, if I'm giving you a probiotic to improve your bifidobacteria, and that's why I don't push everyone to take a probiotics. It would be so much easier. How come probiotics don't work? Because you're giving the probiotics, but then at the same time, you're giving either a contaminated probiotics, either a dead bacteria probiotic, either whatever methods you're using killed the bifidobacteria. Either you expose the bifidobacteria to oxygen and killed it, therefore you're giving dead bacteria, or you think you're giving bifidobacteria, but you're not. I had a lady who was testing a yogurt with me, and the yogurt will stay quiet. But she was testing it and she said, oh, you should promote my yogurt. It's got tons of bifidobacteria. So I tested her stools. She had zero bifidobacteria. And I go, well, it's hard for me to believe your yogurt has bifidobacteria if you're eating it and you don't have bifidobacteria. So I tested the yogurt. There was no bifidobacteria. Here's a woman who invested in a company to make her a yogurt that had bifidobacteria, and it never had bifidobacteria. You understand? So there's so many reasons. So that's why it's such a loaded question, because there's so many ways to kill the bifidobacteria. There's so many ways to increase it. But if you don't have those two together lined up, it's like a fire, which is what we're still having in California 16 days later, although it might be 16 years at this point. 16 days later, it's if you're putting water to turn off the fire, but then you're putting gasoline, it's not going to turn off the fire, right? So it's the same principle with the bifidobacteria in gut health, right? If you don't know what's increasing the bifidobacteria, this is why it's research. This is research we need to invest in to support, because I don't know, is curcumin, is it increasing the bifidobacteria or decreasing it? Vitamin D, increase or decrease? I mean, I can tell you vitamin D because we tested it. Vitamin C increases bifidobacteria. We discovered it, right? But if I'm taking vitamin C and my vitamin C vitamin has arsenic in there, right? It's going to kill the bifidobacteria regardless, right? So there's so many things we do. And then here's the other thing. Are you stressed? What kind of life are you leading? Are you jumping on a plane and traveling every other day and doing these overnights and staying on a plane ride for 16 hours? Yeah, that kills. You know what I mean? So it's not so straightforward.
So a question I have is, so let's say I'm treating Lyme and you happen to just be a person that's suffering from chronic Lyme plus infection. So you are on this 2-year multi-antibiotic protocol. And your study showed that your bifido will go down with antibiotic use. But if you use that, is there a guarantee? Let's say you do a fecal matter transplant later to support your gut microbiome. Is it because to me it sounds like I don't feel that there would be a full guarantee that then getting an FMT now you're cool, now everything is from the past is done.
There's no guarantee. There are no guarantees. Okay, this is the abyss. I always tell people, you're jumping into the abyss with me, and pray to God that God guides me out of your abyss, right? Because people come to me, terminal cancer, colon cancer. I work with their oncologists, by the way. I'm not that far out of medicine where I basically say, you know what, chemo, etc. is bad. We have what's good right now is good right now, right? So we can't, what we see, in all these clinical trials and everything, if it's helping patients, if it's giving them one more month, one more year, we've got to go with what's right now, right? Same with Crohn's disease. When we did, I'm not a fan of biologics, but it does help my patients. And it did help my patients for all these years. And I did help bring those products to market because I saw it helped my patients, right? I would not be true to myself if I didn't believe that there is a role for pharmaceuticals, right? I mean, the fact is, ivermectin is a pharmaceutical, aspirin. We've done very well in the pharmaceutical section up to this stage, right? Now, what I'm seeing is a corruption of science where we're basically stopping to ask questions and to go to the next stage. What if the next stage is a combination of the chemo drug and an optimization of the gut to improve the cancer. In other words, hand in hand, right? Think about again what I'm doing with C. diff. I'm giving the antibiotic, killing the bacteria, which is a pharmaceutical product. Then I'm restoring the microbiome with a new microbiome. Here are the problems with fecal transplant, because I don't want people like calling my office and saying, we want fecal transplant for Lyme disease and for all sorts of things. Here are the problems. We are not there yet. Fecal transplant's only approved for C. diff. C. diff, especially if you're dying, okay? Back in the olden days, we used to do C. diff and we used to take the spouse's poop or the siblings' poop. Now, some GI doctor like myself are still doing it, okay? However, now it's very difficult to do that because there's a pharmaceutical product and the lab that used to test the stool donors do no longer test those stool donors. We do in my lab but it's expensive because we're not covered or anything like that. So we do it under a research protocol. And so we test it, but at the same time, it's not readily available for every doctor around the country, okay? So the fact that you want to use your child, your father, I think that should be acceptable, right? But that's not available. Pharmaceutical product is here. That's what we have, right? So this pharmaceutical, and this is why I went into this field of the microbiome, because here's the problem. Pharmaceutical products are only good for this time, right? It's not as good as, in my opinion, anyways, in my humble opinion, and I think Dr. Stolman would agree with me as well, than what we used to, and Dr. Colin Kelly would probably agree that when we used to do family members, it was a little bit better, right? And also you knew the family, the wife had no problem getting stools from her husband because she's getting it on a daily basis. I always joke with people and I say, be nice to your wife. You never know when you're going to need their shit, literally. So, in the olden days, we were able to do that, okay? Now it's not so easy. So you have to depend on a pharmaceutical product. You don't know the pharmaceutical product. You don't know if that pharmaceutical product is suicidal. You don't know if that pharmaceutical, sure, the doctors are testing the pharmaceutical product, right? But you don't know. You don't know. Maybe the patient wanted to get $500 and didn't tell the doctor or the clinic that he was suicidal because he was making $500. And that's the problem with that, the way that the pharmaceutical companies are right now is they're paying these donors a lot of money to donate, and they're college kids. So what college kid is going to put on a questionnaire? Yeah, I didn't travel. Yeah, I don't use marijuana. Yeah, I don't use alcohol. Please, okay? So, they see the $500, they're getting paid, and that's it. Okay, so unless it's done really well in a lab, Dr. Alex Karutz has a lab at University of Minnesota, and he's very strict, and he analyzes, and he's very, very smart. So I'm pretty sure he will pick up on, I've had some amazing donors from him over the years. Actually, one donor improved a case of mine that was suicidal, C. diff, chronic UTI, and psoriasis. So, the right donor does miracles, but here's the problem. COVID and, in my opinion, the shots have messed up the microbiome of humanity, okay? And the stress of the COVID and the stress of the fires and the stress of the politics and listening to whether, you're a Trumper or an anti-Trumper, all that has stressed up people to the max that they've killed off their microbiome. Good luck finding those donors that are like Zen and not really paying attention to the politics, right? And that are basically eating the right food and not caring about COVID and not caring about the vaccine. Good luck finding those people, right? Because, and those people are not necessarily a match for you because you're high paced, for that person that's high paced. So when you say, are there guarantees? No, there's no guarantees, because if you're that producer or that executive that's on a go constantly, and I give you a new microbiome of a Zen person, you're going to kill that in 1 month. And then you're going to come back to me and say, Dr. Hazan, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, what's your lifestyle? You know what I mean? So I'm very selective of who I do fecal transplant on, mainly because of that. The other thing about fecal transplant, other than the difficulty in finding the donors, and the difficulty in doing these procedures and the expenses, is also the fact that we don't know. And that's me being totally transparent. We don't know enough about the microbiome to say with certainty this microbiome is clean, right? So Dr. Kurods, who I love, could find the best donors, and he's been going at it with a gut feeling, in my opinion, initially, and also looking at the diversity and looking at various markers we look at in the microbiome space. But here's the thing, there's so many microbes in there. We don't know. Just today, I had dialister. Dr. Barodi loves that little microbe dialister. It's a good bugger. I mean, Akkermansia, we've seen these pendulum. Is that a good bug or is that a bad bug? It seems to be good for some people but then it's bad for other people. And is it because it's good up to a certain level and therefore it becomes bad after a certain level? If you go back to C. diff is a bacteria that we thought forever killed the bug. It's bad for us, right? But C. diff exists in 99% of healthy volunteers we've tested. So why is that, right? And that's not to say 100%, but I picked up C. diff in my stools, and I don't have C. diff. I don't have toxigenic C. diff. I don't have diarrhea. I picked it up in hundreds of doctors that I tested their stools. That doesn't mean that they have C. diff. That just means they were exposed to C. diff, and C. diff is part of their microbiome. But something is putting it in check and says, hey, don't secrete your toxin. We're watching.
I wanted to ask about it's funny because I was going to ask about the FMT, but you answered so many of my questions about the donor selection. No, I love it. I love it. So I'm going to just ask this. So, you just brought up Akkermansia, and you said that sometimes the high and low, and I saw research that if it's, people think it's like low Akkermansia is why you are obese. But then if you have high Akkermansia, it shows that there's a correlation with MS or multiple sclerosis. So with that same logic, if we don't know what exactly all the strains do, I know you are a fan of this Bifido, and so maybe we can dive into Bifido, but is there a certainty with Bifido then? Hey guys, just a really quick interruption. If you notice, we don't really run ads on this YouTube channel. And just being fully candid, instead of making money on external sponsors, we really wanted to share more about our functional medicine practice so that if you ever need it, you know that what we offer and what we can provide in terms of service and products. If you didn't know, our private practice has one-on-one sessions. We have packages. We do group calls with SIRS and with mind-body or nervous system regulation. And we also do a lot of functional tests. Some people do a complete wellness panel with us. So once a year, they get a detailed, comprehensive blood work to see how their health is doing. We also do functional tests such as stool tests to see if you have parasites or candida or H. pylori. We also do a lot of the Dutch urine as well as saliva tests to make sure that your hormones and thyroid is functioning well. Our flagship is our symptom burden, where we really trust the innate wisdom in our bodies. And so we are trying to see what symptoms do you have, because oftentimes a combination of symptoms is related to a specific system. We focus on gut health, where we try to get people's gut healing, because most of our immune system is in our gut. If you make your own body stronger, you will be a lot more resilient to everything that is in our toxic world. We believe in wellness for all, and not everyone can afford to work with us. So we provide a lot of free guides, free ebooks, free downloads, free tactical things to get you healing in your wellness journey. We also write comprehensive, detailed articles. For example, why a carnivore diet may have lower T3 markers, but may be in fact okay. I hope that the content I share is enough for you to get healing. But if the needle is not moving enough with a carnivore diet, with lifestyle changes, with mind-body work, if it's not moving enough when you are working alone, just know that we have the services to support you when and if that day comes. Because we are holistic health, we also have a prescriber. So if you are on thyroid medications or hormone medications, or you need medications for SIRS, we are able to walk you through the process. Our goal is to get you off most of your medications. All right, guys, thank you for being part of this community. Let's get back into the video.
So I think there's some certainty, right? Okay. If you look at the Amazon jungle women do not have Bifidobacteria. Okay. So there's some certainty within the population you're testing, right? So when we test different people, we're going to get different results, and we're not going to get anything in the microbiome space. Okay. In the microbiome space, you really have to be precise. In other words, I'm not going to test a vegan and compare it to a carnivore, completely different microbiome. I'm not going to test a Mexican and compare it to a Japanese, completely different microbiome, right? Vice versa, China and America. Yes, there is some bifidobacteria. China has adopted the drinking of milk, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, there are some similarities, but I'm gonna say that probably one of the best microbes, without saying what it is, for China is not bifidobacteria, but probably another one. So every population has a microbe. And know this, we haven't published. Right now, it's very difficult to publish to begin with, which is a shame because there's so much stuff I know that, and I'm a bit of a hurricane. So if you're looking at my papers and saying, oh my God, she didn't put the right number in there, there's a zero that's missing, and therefore we should retract her paper, good luck. It's not going to happen. I'm not looking at the trees or the leaves on the trees. I'm looking at the forest. Okay. So, and I'm a hurricane. So I do multiple research at once. The big picture is this paper said this and showed this. You want to contradict that? Go talk to the patients, right? Go redo the data, right? So we need to focus in research on like, what are we seeing in the big picture? Okay. The big picture that I'm seeing right now is the disappearance of bifidobacteria around the world. And that's bifidobacteria that we know so far is a good bacteria. Could bifidobacteria up to a certain level be bad? Yeah, possible. I mean, we don't know. Could it be bad at a certain age over a certain level? Yeah, possibly. We don't know. These are the kind of studies we need to do. We need to follow the trend. We need to follow the kids. We need to follow these newborns. And what I'm seeing is like a dozen, 20, 30, 100 kids, but I'm not seeing them long term. These studies are expensive. They're like between $2,000 and $3,000 per sample. And so when you do them, and it's a huge personnel and machine and reagents, and all of it is expensive. Just the lab alone is a $2 million project, right? That you have to keep up every year. So when you start on this and you go, okay, well, I'd love to have unlimited funds and test all that, but it's not feasible. So we do what we can, and we see something, right? We see something. We see a population that looks like this, that has these microbes. We see a population that eats certain foods that eat these microbes. Now, when you step back and look at the forest and not the trees, you start going, wow, well, the forest looks different in Venezuela than it looks in Mexico, right? The microbiome of Venezuelan looks different than in Mexico. But then again, the microbiome of Venezuela is different than Mexico, right? So why would I expect these two populations to match if they have different dirt, different environment, different groups? And I'm going to push to say that's how we create diversity. That's how we create the balance, right? If we were all similar, we'd just be a bunch of robots, right? But here we are, different continents with different physical attributes, different mental attributes, different gifts, right? And we complement each other, right? Think about the Chinese with the Italian, with the Mexicans, all complementing each other, right? That's the beauty of the world. So definitely they're not similar, they're different. There probably is a commonality of this bifidobacteria that starts off in youth, but I think there's a commonality of other microbes in different populations, but definitely on a general picture, majority, probably a majority bifidobacteria is good. Probably up to a certain level, C. diff is bad, right? Probably up to a certain level, E. coli is bad, but then E. coli is good too, because it helps in absorption, right, of certain elements. So, everything in the microbiome, we have to start the same way that I'm looking at planet Earth with different races and different religion and different people with different thought process and different ideas and different innovations all coming together to bring the planet together. It's the same thing in the microbiome. Look at it on a microscopic view. and you'll see there's a group of Clostridium and they do their thing. There's a group of Ruminococcus and they do their thing. There's a group of Bifidobacteria, they do their thing. Akkermansia, they do their thing, right? And all these microbes, overlap each other, and they kind of like, and some microbes secrete the same things as other microbes. So if you lose one group of microbes, well, you've got another group that's coming in and saying, you know what, I'll pitch in and start secreting some other microbes, right? Some other substances to help the human stay alive, right? But ultimately, the purpose of the microbiome is to constantly recycle itself, right? Like the planet, right? But there needs to keep that balance. And I think this is a beautiful time in the world. And what is beautiful to me about evaluating the microbiome is not only it's like looking at it as, wow, answers to so many diseases, but looking at it as answers to afterlife, right? What happens when the body decomposes itself with microbes and you go back to the dirt? What happens to those microbes? Where do they go, right? So I think that's the fascinating thing about the microbiome, and something that we can't stop and suffocate. We need to come together as a planet, because, if there are other lives out there, and we've opened the can of worms of going into Mars, and then we discover other microbes in Mars, we probably should understand them, and we probably should join forces here on the planet before we get microbes from Mars to come to the planet.
In your talk, you mentioned that you saw correlations with just longevity and bifido. And so what are some factors that reduce bifido? And then if you were to pick three big pieces or three levers that impact the gut microbiome adversely, what would those be?
Well, without saying which antibiotics, I'm going to say some antibiotics.
Okay.
Obviously. Some drugs, without saying which drugs. And that goes for street drugs as well, not just the pharmaceutical drugs. I think one glass of alcohol possibly could improve that study. Those studies need to be repeated, in my opinion, in a controlled setting in our lab. But I think overall, alcohol is probably detrimental to the microbiome. Think about what we do with alcohol. We sterilize counters with alcohol, right? So if you're drinking that bottle of scotch, may not be a good thing, right? Because you're killing your microbiome. Is that why you start having an imbalance in your microbiome, start having bad microbes going into the liver, then all this process of liver disease, etc. So, the body is all connected. The blood is connected to the bowels, connected to the brain, the heart, nerves, skin, all connected. So the wrong drugs, alcohol, stress, I think, definitely I've seen it with me. I'm always the guinea pig on the pandemic. If I get into a huge argument with someone, the next day my bit was shot down all the way. So I think stress. So I've changed my ways. I don't get excited too much. Although it's not easy to not get excited when they retract papers for no good reason, right? So I have to kind of like use the fun of it, right? I have to make fun of it. I'm like, you know what? And then and here's the thing, that's my way of rebalancing my microbiome, right? So it's like, okay, talk shit about me, let's talk about it. I wrote the book, you know what I mean? So it balances me out, where it's like, I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm just going to laugh it off, right? And I think when you laugh it off, probably pisses off the people who created the problems to begin with. But I think stress is I think we're going to come to find out that stress is a huge, huge killer of the bifidobacteria. Why do I say that mostly? Well, when you see kids with Crohn's disease and you take their history, and by the way, Crohn's disease we found had lots of bifidobacteria in the untreated. And you start taking the history, and it's always, well, mom and dad were getting divorced, or my girlfriend broke up with me and it created like or I'm failing my classes and I'm not getting into college, right? So there's always a big stressor before the disease, right? Same with, spouses that love each other, that have been together. And then 6 months later, so one spouse dies, and then 6 months later, the other spouse dies, right? Because of that relationship that they had, and the stressor of losing that spouse kills the microbiome. You also see, people who lost their children, who lost their child, and they never really recovered.
Right.
And because of that, they start having digestive problems and issues and etc. So, this is basically, so I think stressor is a big thing. Turn off the TV, turn off the news, stop talking politics, get into the garden, go play. So, go laugh, go hug a person, love will win over hate. So I think that's very important. I think those are the things that, when we say, what are the big 3 things, 4 things? I mean, I've given you 4 things, 5 things, I think. Those are, antibiotics, drugs, ancillary drugs, alcohol, stressors. Those are the big things. And then you get into the minutia, the other things that we're testing that I can't really talk about, which are, in the foods. There are some foods that are killing the bifidobacteria. Obviously, everything is like kill, heal, right? And so, if you're not healthy and you're eating the same foods over and over, probably that's your clue, right? Where it's like, maybe I should change diet because my microbiome is killing me because it's craving the same foods I'm giving it, right? So I think that's your clue. When they say gut instinct, listen to your gut, pay attention to what you're eating. If you're not going the right path, change your diet. That's the first step.
I love it. Then on the flip side, then what, and I know it's still in research, but what are some things that you've seen increase bifido?
Well, I think we discussed it at iLabs. Vitamin C was an in vitro study initially where they showed vitamin C increases bifidobacteria, and that's actually used for making probiotics too. Some companies use it. So vitamin C does. Here's the thing: too much vitamin C kills the bifidobacteria, so you got to be careful. So it's about that right balance of vitamin C for your body. So vitamin C improves the bifidobacteria. We tested, I think, 22 patients. I do so many studies, I forget the numbers anymore. And also my brain is like different directions. But anyways, we tested that and we published vitamin C increases the bifidobacteria. That's why some people have seen improvement with, various conditions with vitamin C and vitamin C infusion, because probably it did increase the bifidobacteria.
Interesting.
Ivermectin short-term increases the bifidobacteria. So if you're that patient that is desaturating, oxygen is low, we noticed, on the front line of treating COVID that oxygen saturation went up when you give bifidobacteria, when you give ivermectin. Why ivermectin? Because it is the fermented product of a bacteria that is similar to bifidobacteria. It's in the same phylum. It's in the same group of microbes that share one thing in common. So maybe the substance, and I wrote a hypothesis on that was retracted. When hypotheses are retracted in medicine, you have to ask yourself, what are we doing here? Yeah. So, the hypothesis was maybe that substance of that bacteria is what's feeding the bifidobacteria to climb up and therefore bind to the interleukin and then bind to the cytokines and release the cytokines, So that's what we kind of thought. That's still basically, that's what we saw. What other things? Well, I mean, there's a lot of things like diet changes, and we have a protocol now that we're working on that will be coming out soon, hopefully. That is, what I believe should be the diet to improve the bifidobacteria. The right probiotics. Remember, 16 out of 17 probiotics kill the bifidobacteria, or do not have bifidobacteria in them. And then majority of bifidobacteria probiotics that are out there are dead, right? Because they were exposed to oxygen. The bacteria is supposed to be anaerobic. You're supposed to mimic bacteria in your gut, right? So that doesn't breathe oxygen. So are you exposing these microbes to the air and therefore they're dead by the time they get to the colon? And what does a dead microbe do to a live microbe, right? It's like having a human being sleeping with a bunch of corpse. What do? You're going to get disease from those corpse and the microbes, right? So I think, that's another thing is, does the bifidobacteria go into the stomach, get killed by the acid in the stomach? Does it open up in the small bowel and give you SIBO? Does it actually reach the cecum and therefore implant in the cecum? And here's the other big thing is, does it implant? Does it stick to the mucosa, grow, allow itself to grow further and reproduce itself? Or do you have to keep taking them, right? And here's the problem with that. If you're starting a kid with probiotics because you gave him antibiotics, right? It's not a good solution to put them on probiotics. I'm very against probiotics in kids, because what you're doing is you're habituating this kid to take probiotics the rest of his life, right? You're not letting him, it's like you're holding his hand instead of letting him walk. It's like you're sheltering him. You're basically, it's like those kids that you basically pamper and clean and keep in a glass setting, and then they go outside and then they get sick. They never develop the immunity. They never were exposed to microbes, as opposed to the kids that's playing in the ground, playing with poop of the cows, shovel, gardening with mom. That's a different microbiome than a kid that's like sterile environment, sterile cup, sterile everything. So, so I'm not a big pusher of probiotics in young people. In my opinion, that's a mistake. I'm also not a big pusher of probiotics in people that have bifidobacteria in their guts, because they obviously are showing me that they're making it. So why not enhance that, right? Grow more of that, right? And maybe those are the people that need vitamins, right? Here's the other thing, vitamins. Not every vitamin is created equal. A lot of vitamins have a lot of junk in them, okay? And when I started my research, I'll tell you, I went to CVS and I started testing vitamins because I was going to take vitamins during the pandemic, exposed to all these COVID patients. And I realized there's a lot of junk in those vitamins. So basically, created my own that are like tested in the lab, that have exactly what I wanted to have. So full transparency on the vitamins. And that's what I put my patients on, those vitamins, because that's my control. That's my standard, right? Because I know where they're made, I know how they're made, and I've tested them. So now I can give them to my patients. And those are the studies you're seeing with the vitamin C increasing the bifidobacteria, right? So we put them under an umbrella of a website, thebiomeboosters.com, because we want people to basically test, and we continue following these folks, right? So these are people that are like in my studies. We follow them, we ask them, we remind them to test their blood, we ask them, have you had COVID? Those are kind of like our control group in a way, but it's the same standardized vitamins for everybody. Because if I change the vitamins and they're not made the same, then I don't see what I want to see, right? I don't see what I saw in my research, okay? The second thing that we noticed, or the third thing that we noticed, is bovine immunoglobulins. So bovine immunoglobulins are the blood of the cow that's spun around. And there's this whole controversy about carnivore, vegan, vegetarian. Well, one thing we discovered is the importance of this bovine, this immunoglobulin, this amazing immunoglobulin that basically improves the bifidobacteria, decreases the Bacteroides, increases the Firmicutes, decreases the Proteobacteria, binds to E. coli, binds to Clostridium difficile. So it's an important, how did I discover it? I had a patient with Crohn's disease that had a lot of Bacteroides, zero Bifidobacteria. Serendipitously, I said, take this powder. Let's see if it helps you. It's the blood of the cow spun, and it's the clear stuff that's cryofreezed, right? So I gave it to him, and then all of a sudden his diversity improved. His Bifidobacteria started improving, his Bacteroides dropped. So that was my N of 1, okay? The kid stopped having Crohn's disease, was off biologic. We got lucky with this kid, okay? And I'm going to say we got lucky because there are sometimes you do that on other kids and it doesn't really work, okay? But here's the thing that I had on this kid, the perfect signature microbiome that caused this Crohn's disease. And then when I tested 22 patients with bovine immunoglobulins, we noticed exactly what we saw in that kid. Increase the Bifidobacteria, decrease the Bacteroides, increase the firmicutes, decrease the proteobacteria, increase the diversity. So is bovine, in the right bovine, because obviously if you're giving me blood from a cow that you're over vaccinating, over giving it antibiotics, over, feeding it, grass with pesticides, well, that's not going to help, right? So, and if you're giving me the blood of a cow that has mycobacteria paratuberculosis on top of that, well, forget it. You're never going to get better with anybody. So we test this bovine. It was a product that was in a pharmaceutical trial that I had done previously. The company decided not to sell it anymore. So we acquired it because I felt that it was a great product. It actually helps a lot of my long haulers, etc. Lyme disease patients, it also helps them if they have that signature microbiome that I'm seeing. So that we test that bovine. It's also, available. I had E. coli in Morocco that I acquired and ended up being really sick from it, and took some of that bovine, basically cleared it, and amazing for that. So this is something we basically have seen. It's not, but we test it, right? Because I don't trust anyone, and I'm always like, did they contaminate this blood? Is it contaminated? Is there, did they, because my mind goes there. My mind always goes like, what can they do to like stop me, right? So I'm always vigilant on every little thing that's product related, right? So same thing with probiotics. So probiotics, like I said, the right probiotics, we are testing a bunch. Also other products, okay? So you've seen a lot of products out there that say gut health. Not all of them are specifically gut health, but the companies that come to us and say, Dr. Hazan, we want you to test our products. I'm basically I'm all for testing because I get to see the data. Look, I'm not bought, right? At the end of the day, if the product doesn't improve, like that lady with the yogurt, I told her she could have paid me $1 million. I would have still told her there's no bifidobacteria in your yogurt. I'm sorry. I'm not going to like fabricate a yogurt with, just because I have to sleep at night, right? I need to make sure that my conscience is clear that I didn't do anything to harm someone, right? So ultimately, if a company is willing to test with us and say, you know what, Dr. Hazan, we're willing to test. Let's give it to like 5-10 patients. I have a slew of patients. I have a huge database of patients. So if the company is willing to say, look, we'll take care of those patients, we'll do their stool sample, we'll give them the product, great. That's all I want to see, right? Why do I do clinical trials on the front line and for pharma? Because I want to see the data first, right? Because if I can see the data, I can sell the product, right? If I can see that, I saw Remicade improve Crohn's disease, I could go behind Remicade. Now, can I go behind Remicade now at this stage of my life where I've seen so many other things that work? No, I'm going to say, well, Remicade is probably for this population. But then for this population, I'm going to give it this, this, and that. That's the art of medicine, right? So, this is, to make a long story short, that's what I've discovered. I think also people that are calmer, yoga, meditation probably helps build the bifidobacteria, but I don't know. We need to do the research. I think there's some foods that are probably building fermented food, probably, but we need to do the research. I mean, it would make sense, right? Sauerkraut, sourdough, etc. But we don't know. We'd have to do the research. So
I want to ask a couple questions from just the stuff you shared right now. And thank you for all that information. One, I wanted to know if you're able to share like how much vitamin C, and if it was it, what form of vitamin C. I think you said one was the IV, and then also with the IgGs, was there a certain amount? But before I have you answer that, I wanted to talk about the children's probiotics. So the understanding I have is that if a child or anyone really takes an antibiotic, it's sort of killing off a lot of your microbes. And in taking probiotics, especially if you take a spore-based one, or if you take, ones that have millions of strains supposedly, and then you take it, and it's supposed to repopulate or support the microbes that are already in your system. So if my child were to take antibiotics and now they're sort of left defenseless, and then I always think of, well, what about fungus, right? So now you're letting the fungus like candida, go party, and now maybe it'll overgrow. So instead, if I can sort of fast forward the process by having the child take probiotics, that was the logic in. And then we've seen it in just in our practice where a child will have terrible eczema, and by taking probiotics you see a
Yes,
vast improvement.
yes.
So I'm just curious your thoughts why.
Yeah. So, but when do you stop that probiotic, right? So you're going on a gut feeling that the kid doesn't have bifidobacteria because he's expressing
Hmm.
another symptom, which is eczema, right? Which is possibly linked with loss of bifidobacteria,
Okay.
right? But when do you stop that, right? When do you develop that resilience in that kid and do nothing and just give him vitamins, right? And here's the problem: there are no studies that basically are showing that with probiotics or without probiotics you're going to have the same end stage, the same end point, right? Because what if you do nothing? Like, think about the two kids. One has an ear infection and the other one has an ear infection, and one you treat with antibiotics and he does great, but then the other one you don't do anything and then they do great alone, right? We tend to react out of fear of what will be, and therefore we treat because of what will be. But what about letting the kid develop its own resilience to fight off and to build up that microbiome with the right nutrition and the right vitamins, rather than, hi, let me give you a band-aid, right? Because that's exactly what you're doing. You're basically saying, okay, you know what? I see there's a problem. I see they've lost their bifidobacteria. I'm going to give them probiotics. Okay. You're giving the band-aid. You're not fixing the problem to restart what was there to begin with, right? Because how many kids are given antibiotics and do not develop eczema, right? How many kids are given antibiotics are perfectly healthy, right? Is it because they've developed that result? And how many kids are not given antibiotics and bounce back, right? We tend to be so pushing these pills because it makes us feel good as physicians, right? Let's write a prescription here. You feel like you've done something, but sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing and just give confidence to the mom that the kid is going to be fine, and to restart the nutrition. That's the most important thing, right? I think restart making sure that the kid is having a yogurt, is having fermented food, is having the right vitamins, his vitamin D is not depleted, right? We check his vitamin D. Because what we do when we push these antibiotics, when we push these probiotics, we're doing the same thing in essence, right? We're making the body used to something, right? Think of that person with
External.
Lyme disease, right? That you give an antibiotic and they feel good, right? Because you've sterilized their guts, they don't have any microbes in them. So they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. Doctor, you've improved me. You stop the antibiotics and they're like, oh, it's come back again. I probably have Lyme again. So then you continue it and then you continue it. And then it's a year down the road and this person, you cannot get him off the antibiotics. So then what do? You're putting him in an oxygen tank, right? Because you're like, okay, well, let's try ozone, right? So what are we doing with the ozone, right? And so we constantly are holding these people's hands and we're replacing the ability of the body to fight itself, right? The ability to develop a resilience, right? So there is something to be said about, I was healthy before COVID. I'm gonna be healthy. I'm just gonna it's gonna take time. I killed my microbiome because I took so many antibiotics, but I'm gonna give it time and let it heal naturally so that I regain my resilience and my microbiome, rather than doing one thing, then another, then another, then another. And then you're never really fixing these folks. They're constantly coming back.
Well, I can see your case when it's if they didn't take any medicine. So obviously being all natural is so much
Yes,
better,
yes,
and
yes.
strengthening the immune system because most of that's in your gut anyway. But if you take antibiotics, which is already as you said, one of the biggest culprits of ruining the microbiome is antibiotics. And if we're overly using it, And if it's sometimes there's little bits leaking into your water, or we're using hand sanitizers and then eating right after, all of these things are, antibacterials in certain ways. Could probiotics just support that temporarily? And we say, okay, just 30 days and then you move on, because, and then that's
That
not
that
really.
that's and by the way, that's a great study to do, right? That's right there is a great study to answer that question, right? Let's take the kids, let's take two groups of kids that are getting antibiotics. Let's give one a super strong probiotic that we know of. Maybe we'll get one of those probiotic companies to support that. So spread it out there. Let's see if the kids that got the probiotics did better than the kids who didn't get the probiotics, right?
But both parties took the antibiotics.
Both
It would
parties
be
take the
fascinating.
antibiotics. And then you could do a third group where the kids don't take the antibiotics, right? And then
Right, right.
right? So I think that's a study that needs to be done. And
Agreed.
but here's the thing, it needs the right probiotic, and it needs to be independent, not to push the probiotic or not to push the antibiotic. It needs to be completely unbiased.
Yeah, I was going to say that because there are a lot of studies about probiotics and its efficacy with leaky gut and so on and so forth. But usually there is a vested interest there, to be fully candid. Yeah.
And every time, I look at these studies now and I look at like, okay, who funded the study? Oh, it's the same company that's like pushing the product.
Right.
It's like I'm being sold a car as being this, but then, it doesn't make sense to me, right? So I think there needs to be unbiased research. Even me, let me just tell you, because I do have, we do sell vitamins, for example, right? And bovine, etc., to support the research. In fact, none of that money comes to us directly. It just feeds the research. It feeds the meetings, it feeds the publications, which are retracted. So that was a lot of money. So you could see I'm a little bit sore, but I'm going to bring it back to fun. But it feeds all that, right? So it needs, because this research that I do is expensive, right? I mean, like when we test vitamin C, which is like what, 10 cents a pill, we're not making any big money that's going to pay for $100,000 study, right? I think that was about the cost of that study, about 125,000, okay, that I paid, right? So, when you pay for that and you need the funding, so this is where the foundation comes in to support that. But then guess what? We got some great data out of the vitamin C. But here's what I do, okay, to keep me unbiased, okay? First of all, I look at the patients, I interact with the patients, I recruit the patients, and then I send the stools. They have an FT number. I don't even know the patient and the FT number, completely separate lab completely. I have no part of that. They analyze the data, they do everything. Then what happens is I give that data to an independent scientist, right? And I say, look at the data, show me what you see. And then I give it to a statistician without having looked at anything, right?
Okay.
And then they basically come back with me with these beautiful graphs, okay? And then I give it to a team and we write it together. But essentially that's how I do it, to try to stay as, unbiased as possible, right? Listen, I'll tell you an example during the pandemic, actually, and I could probably tell you, when you say what kills the bifidobacteria, well, we noticed the vaccine, the messenger RNA vaccine kills the bifidobacteria, but we also noticed that hydroxychloroquine, right? Now remember, hydroxychloroquine Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, Hayes D-Pak, was the protocol that I posted on clinicaltrials.gov on April 2nd or 3rd, and was supported by the FDA, okay? Now, we discovered that it kills the virus. Like we had like 15 samples at the beginning, before and after. We discovered COVID in the stools. We discovered 14 out of 15 patients, virus eradicated from them, okay? So then we start, and symptom improvement, obviously. But then what we discovered is it also killed the microbiome. That's not, even though that's my patent, it's not, and I've spent like hundreds of thousands, because at the beginning I was like, well, I'm going to have a product and I'm going to have a patent. Next thing you know, I end up in this healthcare revolution where I realize it's not about the product, it's not about pharma, it's not about a patent. It's about doctors needing to stay being doctors, and that's my path, right? And then when you realize that, you're like, well, okay, I know it kills the microbiome. I'm not going to push it, right? Because here's the thing, it does work for people that are like, I saw it with my own two eyes, right? People that are dying, that are oxygen low, and they have zero bifidobacteria because they have all these comorbidities, they're old. When you give hydroxychloroquine, they start improving. And that's what Dr. Didier Raoult was noticing himself, and all these other doctors that were using hydroxychloroquine, right? But here's the problem, on a prophylactic, it was not a good prophylaxis because it kills your microbiome, right? It's better to just let the vitamins, let all that improve the microbiome. So here's a product that was my patent that I could have been biased to it and said, oh, I'm going to close my eyes to the fact that it hurts the microbiome. I'm still going to push it. I had a lot of doctors that were pushing it. We had President Trump was pushing it, but here's the thing. Down the road, I discovered that's not the right solution for everyone. And if it's not the right solution for everyone, I should not put a product out there. I should just probably put it for that population, or I should educate the world on how to treat COVID different ways, right? Even ivermectin, doxycycline, it's not the answer for everybody, Kids did great with just vitamins, and some people did great with nothing, right? So I think we have to come back to the art of medicine. We have to come back to, taking a history, holding the hand of the patient, giving them confidence. When we do all these tests for patients and we do a CAT scan and we do a colonoscopy, what are we doing? We're appeasing the patients and telling them you're fine. You don't have colon cancer. Go home, see you in 10 years, right? But that's healing, right? Right there is the healing. So we, as physicians, have an important role in giving that confidence to the patients that they're going to be fine. And our biggest role is to do no harm. So, that's what I hold on to more importantly than anything. So I think we have to be righteous. We have to be ethical. We have to be unbiased. And I think, if anything, during this pandemic, with my actions, of not caring that I get paid a lot of money by pharma and saying it like it is, because I've lost a lot of money, from clinical trials that I used to do for pharma. I'm blacklisted now. Big deal. You know what? The truth is the truth. This is the truth I saw. That doesn't mean it's the truth forever for everyone. Science is only science of the day, of what you see for that day. 10 years from now, somebody else is going to see something. I encourage that. We need to encourage innovations. When someone comes to me and challenges me and says, like you just did today, well, with the probiotics, what if the probiotics with antibiotics? Yeah, prove me wrong. Let's see. Maybe you're right. Maybe some kids that take antibiotics need to have the probiotics. I encourage that because that's the intellect working. That's the brain asking questions. And that's how we advance. So then we do the study, who hopefully a probiotic company will support. And basically we do 3 groups and we'll have the answer.
Yeah, I love it. I think what I tend to see with the children that use antibiotics when they're really young is there's a tendency for a little bit of maybe their chronic illness or that they've been a little sick. And so then, and of course, I don't have a study was showing that, but just from my clinical practice, I could say there's a tendency with a child that has taken antibiotics that there's a susceptibility that they'll take another antibiotic soon. And so that then senses to me that maybe their microbiome is not that healthy or their immune system is not as robust than the average other child that doesn't get on antibiotics. And so how can we support that if we are supporting or if we are removing the toxic stuff and then in that interim also killing some of the good stuff, could we support? And you're right there, and with maybe some probiotics, or if you're talking about fermented. But I always think if we can strengthen these kids and adults and we maybe temporarily use probiotics or the immunoglobulins, then as they are more robust and they change their diet, they reduce their stress, then maybe they will never need to get on meds or even get on antibiotics because now their garden is flourishing. And so with all that said, I wanted to talk to you about fiber because I know fiber is this.
So let me just tell you one
thing.
thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
My experience with probiotics is,
Okay.
and I do my practice, okay?
Okay.
People that, and of course, I have this expensive genetic sequencing test that tells me the microbiome, right?
Okay.
And it's very sensitive because we go super deep into the
Okay.
microbiome. So we don't see like the probiotics you ate the night before, right? We go super deep.
Okay.
If I see kids that have bifidobacteria in them at a certain level percentage, I usually leave these kids alone and I just supplement with vitamins or
Okay.
both. If I see zero, okay, it's like a garden with no seeds. Those are the kids I give the
Okay.
probiotics. So I'm a little bit different than you in a way because the people that come to me, they're already testing. Like they know I don't treat unless I don't treat
Okay. That's
blind.
fair.
I mean, so for me, it's been great because I improved the microbiome. So if they have bifidobacteria, they're showing me that they're a little bit more resilient. They're a little bit, and especially if they've been vaccinated with COVID vaccines and they have a little bit of bifidobacteria, but less than the rest of the norm, they're showing me their body's trying to build it up, right? So those I just maintain with just vitamins and bovine, right? The ones who have zero, no seeds, no spores, those are the ones that I give the probiotics.
Okay.
And because I feel like they need the probiotics. But here's the thing, again, it has to be the right probiotics.
Right.
You have to retest in a way, and that's what I do because you want to see they're on the up and up. So because if they're not on the up and up, that probiotic you gave did not do anything. And I encourage people to test themselves their own probiotics because these companies are not going to volunteer. They're going to show you the data. Well, I talked to a company recently. They wanted me to like influence their probiotics, which I don't do, especially if I don't do the research on it. And what happened is, I said to the company, I basically said, regardless, people are going to, because they showed me their data. They're like, well, we have this data where it showed before and after. I'm like, listen, I don't know the level that the lab went for. I don't know the validation of the lab. I don't know whether the lab has reproducible, samples. If I give my stools to the lab, is it going to give me the same sample? So that's very important, right? So if you go to a lab and they basically show you, they're getting paid to show you that the bifidobacteria improves and they're getting paid millions of dollars. Well, they're going to write a paper that shows bifidobacteria is increasing, right? They're going to remove some of the, data that's skew the data kind of thing, right? Because nobody really supervises all these studies of probiotics. It's not an FDA clinical trial. And the FDA doesn't really supervise probiotics, right? So I told that company, I said, look, ultimately the patients are going to know. Do you know how many patients come to me every day on probiotics? And I find zero bifidobacteria. And on purpose, I tell them, you know what? Don't stop your probiotics. Let me see if I can find it in your gut. And they have zero bifidobacteria. So what happened? Either it got killed in the stomach, but I still should be able to see a dead bacteria, right? Because it's DNA, dead or alive. I should be able to see it. So, the fact that it's not in there, I have to ask myself, did that probiotic have bifidobacteria? What happened to it? Did it get out of the stools and never even implanted or do anything, right? So those are the things, that need to be done. And that's why it's expensive research. It's also tough because it's not research that's basically, that the doctors know.
No, I think that's fair. I think the way that because like you said, I mean, we don't have access to the genetic sequencing as you do, but we'll go by symptoms. So if the child is not at your doorstep yet and their eczema is clearing and say that they are using a spore-based probiotic, then it's like, okay, maybe it's working enough and maybe it's diet. And I'm a firm believer, just like you, in the garden belief and not having these children on these probiotics long term. It's like you should change the diet, not just have these band-aids. So I'm right there with you. But with all that said, I wanted to talk to you about fiber. So I know that fiber, we want us to eat fiber because then it breaks down into the short chain fatty acids, which our gut loves. But I think the last part of our colon eats or thrives off of the dead mammalian cells and all of that. So in the carnivore community, we don't eat fiber, obviously. And the thought is that, a lot of people then are either constipated or they're risking colon cancer. But we see so many people's gut health improve. Now, it could be that I also give the probiotics. And of course, a study would be great there. But we also give immunoglobulins. So I'll never fully know
What
of.
is immunoglobulins, right? You think about the guy who's eating his steak, he's eating it raw, he's eating blood, right? I mean, what I'm giving you with the immunoglobulin is just a cryo-freeze blood, but essentially it's blood in the steak, right? So when you have that bloody steak, well, you're getting immunoglobulins,
Oh, I
whether
didn't
you
even
like
think
it
about
or not.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
so the carnivore diet. So the other thing about the carnivore, what is the cow eating? It's eating the grass and processing it, and it's going into its muscle, right?
that's
Inadvertently,
true.
you're eating that diversity, right? That the cow is eating, right? Which is interesting because if you look at the microbiome of the cow, completely different than the human being, right? But here we are, as look at how life is so beautiful that the microbes, a body decomposes itself, becomes, bones and dirt and microbes. And then you've got these chickens eating the worms that is eating the dirt, right? And the chickens are eating the dirt and the microbes. And then they give you eggs, which is the protein, and then you're eating the chicken that ate the worm, that ate the dirt. So it's beautiful how like the whole circle of life, we're just part of that animalistic circle of life where every animal is eating. Look at the elephant. Okay, the best example is the elephant. So a dong of an elephant is a ton of fiber. Okay, because they're eating all the grass, all the dirt, everything. You break that dong of an elephant, you see ticks flying, right? And you ask yourself, well, why is the guy that's in the safari, why isn't he getting Lyme disease? He's touching this dong of an elephant full of ticks because he's exposed to the phylum. He's exposed himself. But you take a person that's been living in a sterile environment, right? That everything's clean, prim, proper, and then they go on a hike in Malibu and they get bitten by a tick, and then they have Lyme disease forever, right? They started off sterile, gone into the wild. You can't, right? You can't do that. So here's the thing I learned about the microbiome, which is very important. You can live with a sterile gut, okay? And this is why the whole naturopath world sees improvement in what you do with everything you do, right? And even the doctors with these antibiotics, right? You can live in a sterile world, right? Where you kill off all the microbes. But here's the problem. You go from that sterile world to India, where you're walking barefoot and you're catching a parasite go into your foot to your brain or to your pancreas. And then next thing you know, you wake up one morning and you're like cancer, right? So you can't, you either live in the diverse world, like the Amazon jungle, right? They live in the forest, they live in the dirt, they're part of the environment, right? Those people, you don't see them having diabetes, right? You don't see, unless they start incorporating our horrible diets, right? But you don't see them. Like look at Kiribati, right? My daughter did a beautiful study with a doctor at USC where she basically looked at the population of Kiribati, and the population is diabetic, overweight, morbidly obese, and they're a model of what globalization has done to that island. In that, so what is the population? The population used to eat fish, vegetables, hunters and gatherers. They used to garden. They used to be outdoors. Now, all of a sudden, we felt as Americans that they needed to get some of our foods. So we're sending them the chips and the Coke. And what are they doing? They're drinking Coke and eating chips, and they've changed their microbiome completely. And now they're morbidly obese, have diabetes, right? So, and we stopped the whole, what they used to do to live in the ground, right? The homeless population. And you say, how come that homeless guy is living on the streets? I go outside and it's a little bit cold and I'm sneezing and I could catch a cold, right? But yet the guy is living in, 50-degree weather, cold, outside, sleeping outside, eating from garbage, and he doesn't have a cold. Why is that? He's living in the diverse environment, right? So you can live in the sterile environment and you're perfectly fine in that sterile environment. But then once you go to the streets, you're going to get sick because you're not exposed to all these microbes. And you can live in a diverse environment where you're protected with the environment. You're amongst the environment. You've developed and the hard part is going from sterile to it's a gradual progression. And it's not a progression where, well, let me give you an antibiotic because you're having a sniffle. It's a production, it's a resilience. It's okay, you're sick, have some chicken soup, tough it up, build up your immunity, right? So there's two types of therapies in the world, right? There's the therapy of like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you and you're sensitive and I'm going to give you all this and I can't, you need an antibiotic because you're demanding it because you're going to work. And, I'm not going to toughen you up because that's not your personality. There's that population that you have to kind of treat. And then there's the population where, the person's a little bit tough. They don't take antibiotics easily. They don't do propofol on colonoscopy. They don't like meds. That population you can leave alone and say, okay, well, see me in a week, you'll be fine, right? And then they build up that resilience. So, and what I see, and I'm sure you've seen as well, the people that take less of anything, are stronger, right? The people that are doing carnivore diet, they're doing, like ice baths, in the middle of winter, they're strong, they're resilient. They're like, yes, I'm a warrior. I'm going to build up. I'm not going to be scared. Those are the people that were like on the front line of COVID. Those were the people that were like, I don't care. I'm going out there. I'm going to expose myself to COVID. I'm not scared of a virus, right? So there's two different kinds of population in the world. Much like there's two kinds of animals. The animal that eats vegetarian, like the elephant, and has a ton of fiber and ticks. And then the lion who doesn't have any microbes, just blood, because he eats once a week a meat and another animal and he survives.
So do you think then that I guess where I struggle the most with a lot of the GI docs I come into contact with because of the carnivore diet, they are so sure that these people not consuming, fiber supplements or some type of fiber, that they are going to have colon cancer or their microbiome is not going to be diverse. But there are also the doctors that are open to antibiotics. And that to me is a conundrum of, well, if in certain cases, not everyone needs antibiotics, but you're willing to be okay to kill some of the microbiome, which then reduces your resiliency. There's no guarantee that you're going to repopulate the garden properly or efficiently. And then yet we support this fiber notion. And we, at least for me, and I've been eating carnivore, mostly meat-based for 7 years now. I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been. And so I am just curious of, from your research, is fiber needed? Because I think the short chain fatty acids, which is what we're really going after, there is some from ketones and butyrate and then even from, I said, the dead mammalian cells at the end. So is fiber truly needed when our bodies don't even digest it?
Well, I mean, fiber is not needed for lions. So, is it needed for some humans and not needed for others? I don't know. Maybe there are differences in our microbiome. Maybe some humans need fiber. Maybe some humans, remember, the microbiome is passed on from generations to generations, right? You're exposed to microbes from your mom and dad and grandparents, great grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. Do we have a microbiome specific to each human, right? That makes it that, so like I have a guy, one of my employees is vegan. Okay. This whole family has been vegan for generations and generations.
Okay.
He didn't get vaccinated, never got COVID. Okay. So to me, and he never gets sick. Okay. This guy is solid. I mean, like he could be like a quarterback, he's just solid. Okay. Why is it that for him that diet works? Maybe that's his genetic predisposition diet, right? Why is it that the carnivore works for others, but it doesn't work for some, right? I have some people that are carnivore, that went carnivore, and it really didn't work. Their joints were swollen, they got inflamed, they got arthritis. So we don't know. And I think the problem is that we tend to put everyone on the same boat. We need to start, I think, in medicine in categorizing different populations, different people, different, looking back at the history of what is the food that you were eating. One of the things that I do with my patients is go back to their diets, like well, you're from India, and when did you move from India? Like 5 years ago? And what kind of diet did you have in India? And maybe the change from the environment from India to now is what triggered that digestive problem. We certainly see it with like Japanese starting to eat Mexican food. They all start having digestive problems. And then you take the history and you're like, well, probably corn is not a good food for you. You know what I mean? So you see that with different, races, different populations, different people. I think we need to start looking at that carefully. Which population is maybe it's related to their blood. There's definitely a lot of studies out there that, if you're O positive, if you're A positive, you are predisposed to a different diet than a person that is, B negative. So, I think there's a genetic component, there's a blood marker component. We're all different, is what I can say. I know for me, the best diet is the Mediterranean diet. If I start, going ketogenic or low carb, I start having heartburn. So, although I do lose weight fast with that diet, but it's not necessarily the right diet for me. And also, we have a vision of what health is. To me, health is being able to survive multiple viruses or going into the jungle and being fine. You know what I mean? That's what health is to me. It's not necessarily what your body type is, what your weight is, what you're eating. It's your resilience.
Agreed.
That's really what health is.
Yeah, and I feel like I'll just call it standard care, but there's this like, you have a problem, let's treat it, right? Like you have a thyroid issue, let's just treat the thyroid, rather than why is your thyroid now more hypothyroid and not functioning on this resiliency. The goal should always be strengthening the body. And so that's where I harp on antibiotics so much, because yes, there's a place for it, but then it can also reduce your microbiome, which is where most of your immune function is.
100%. And I don't write antibiotics that often. I mean, really have to be like pneumonia, heading to the hospital type of thing. And also, you have to look at your patient, right? The comorbidity.
Yeah.
Is your patient going to be the type that's going to toughen up, or is he going to crumble over, because he has a cough, right? So you have to look at your patient.
Totally.
Every patient is the same, in my opinion, and that's why. Listen, AI cannot replace doctors, patient-doctor relationship. We take the history. We are, holding the hands of our patients. We are giving confidence. We are giving hope. We're giving, strength to the patients to survive, So.
Yeah, I always say that having a practice and doing one-on-ones is more therapy than it is actual functional medicine or anything. One thing I wanted to bring up is, I do think that stress, as you said, is such a big piece, because when I was looking into the nervous system, so we now treat mold and environmental illness. And what we saw is, initially it's like, oh, it's great. People are noticing that their environment needs to be clean, the air that we breathe. But it flips so quickly to now people being scared of their environments. And so they're triggering their nervous system to release all this cortisol. And in that whole thing, the enteric nervous system is there, which also impacts your gut and then the gut microbiome. And so I just think that it's so important to have calm and to not be as stressed, because truly it really does impact your immune function.
I mean, if you start looking at everything in life, right? Like right now with these fires, right? There's so much plastic that's melted and toxins and everything flying. If I start thinking about all that, I'm going to make myself sick, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, you have to kind of say, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Positive outlook, right? We live in a society that's so over dramatic, like everything is chaos and drama, and it sells the media, right? I mean, you look at shows like Oprah who go, super wild when there's like a conflict or a fight. You look at the news, which is completely conflicted, and it sells the media because people need life, they need passion, they need to be stirred up, right? But here's the thing, there is something to be said about calming the system down and just loving and holding someone and bringing in good microbes into the planet. There's this whole concept. So I think there's a role for stress, but the most important thing to me is to decrease the stress.
Right.
It wouldn't have helped me during the pandemic to freak out about COVID. If I was panicking about a patient dying in front of me, there's no way I would have treated this patient. It's like being in this canoe that's sinking and panicking, and you're letting in more water in the
Right.
canoe. You got to calm down. You got to paddle calmly to the shore, and you'll get there without thinking you're going to sink, right? So that's where a balanced microbiome, that's Zen, that's meditating, that's breathing, that all helps. You have people that are like having so much pain and spasms, and sometimes it's just lack of oxygen. They don't breathe enough, you know, they're not eating the right food, or they're eating and going to work, or they're on the phone, on their cell phone and eating. Calm down, get the phone away from you. And unfortunately, these little devices have killed humanity too, because we're constantly comparing ourselves, we're constantly in this hate battle. That's the other thing. If you're on Twitter or Instagram and you have people that are like haters out there, block them. Don't feed them. Don't go into that, right? Because then that's toxicity, right? People are you're gonna have enemies. If you're doing the right thing, if you're healing people, you're gonna have enemies, right? So that means you're doing something right, in the words of
I was
of
just going to say that about your redacted paper
yes,
and any
yes,
censorship. Yeah.
yes, yes. It means I'm doing something right,
Right.
right? It's like I told my husband, I'm like, I'm going to look at them as like gold medals right now. But here's the thing: if you feed into that, you put your enemy on stage. You're upset. You keep going at that. And the thing is, for me, what I realize is the people that retracted my paper have a conflict of interest because they own patents in the microbiome. Okay. And I'm sorry that their company failed. I wasn't, the FDA, busted this company Ubiome years ago for doing things that were just not right. Okay. There was a logic to that company, but they didn't do it right. You need to do things right. You can't shortchange research. You gotta like look at it and say, okay, you know what, it needs to be done right. Now, I feel sorry for all the scientists that were fired and not working for that company. Would love to hire them because they obviously have a brain. In fact, when I started Progenobiome, I was like, I'm gonna hire the scientists from Ubiome because obviously they're passionate about this field. It's more important to work together as human beings than to fight each other.
Right.
At the end of the day, we're all going to die. None of it matters. The only thing that matters is understanding life right now, and where do we go after we die? Do we come back? That's what I'd like to know. Because if we come back, then maybe I'll make different choices, right? So that's important, in my opinion. And I'm more about peace. I'm more about bringing in the love. I'm more about healing. I don't have all the answers, but I'm looking for them, like you. And I want to be challenged, and I love the challenges. And even in the negative, sometimes it strengthens the person, right? Like when you do get a redaction, you go back and you say, yeah, you know what, I should have paid attention better to the numbers on the paper. You know what I mean? It's no big deal. You learn. Everything is a lesson in life. I think I didn't get to be this person if I didn't have all the roadblocks that got me here, because with every roadblock, you get a little bit tougher and a little bit tougher and a little bit tougher. And then eventually you become this person that's like, I don't care. I'm going at it. I'm going full force. I want to look at the microbiome and I want to see what is real and what is not real. Listen, at the end of the day, I'll be the first one to say, if I'm wrong about something, I'll be the first one to say I was wrong. There's no shame in being wrong in research.
Right.
It's part of research. Albert Einstein said, if we knew what it was we were doing, it would not be called research, period. So,
No, I love it. I love that you're willing to, just stand for science today, and it can always change, and you are open to that and challenges. And I know for me personally, just when I was sick, and then I had to just this moment of what is the purpose of my life. And now that I serve or I work with people that are the most chronically ill, I mean, it takes a strong person to want, or desperation to want to do a carnivore diet because they're that sick. And every day it humbles me that there's people that are really sick fighting for their lives. And so then it's like, do you really want to push a supplement or something that you know may not be as efficacious, but you just want to do it for the dollar? And then you see a person in front of your face that's really sick, that really humbles you. And so I think, yeah, that I totally am on the same page. I think if we can all work together and understand what really is helping people, and that's why I started joining. I started in nutrition, and then I like learned about mold, and then I went to iLads because I'm like, I just want answers. It's not about being right or wrong. It's people are sick. How can we get them healthier? And like you said, like your story of that one tribal guy that had spirochetes in his poop and he was totally healthy. But it's like, why do some people get bit and now they're chronically forever ill? Like, what's the difference? And what can we do to marry that and make people more resilient instead of saying, you're just weak, here's all the supplements or the protocols you need to take, maybe temporarily, but how do we strengthen these people? And it sounds like you're after that too. And I love the gut health too.
Longer. That's how we are healthier, right? By asking those questions, like, what is it about that person?
Yes.
During COVID, my first question was, why the young are not getting COVID and the old are dying, right? So I looked at the microbiome, and the answer was in the bifidobacteria. The young have a lot of bifidobacteria, the old don't. So that was, and then I went on that path, right?
Okay.
Which was, let me look at let me collect stools from all the people that are exposed to COVID. My manager in my lab touches these samples. At the beginning, she was wearing a hazmat suit. Then she realized she can't breathe and she can't do her job. And she's a bit of a tough girl. If you ever talk to my lab director, you'll see what I mean. She's very, very tough. I mean, like, puts me to shame. But she's got rid of the hazmat and then got rid of the mask. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're like processing stools with COVID. She's like, I'm fine. I'll be fine. And the reality is, I collected her stools and she had a lot of bifidobacteria. She never got COVID. To this day, she's been exposed to so many strains of COVID, has yet to have COVID, right? So maybe her exposure, little by little by little, developed a resilience, right? So, and maybe that's what immunity is. And maybe that's what these vaccines they want to do, right? But unfortunately, the problem with these vaccines is they're contaminated. They're not perfect. They're not watching the quality. They're mass producing all these vaccines. So the concept is good. The idea behind vaccination is good. The problem is when it gets into manufacturing and going through pipes and going through manhandling and breathing and touching and contamination, it doesn't work on a mass population. And then you're going to have contaminated vaccines that are affecting a certain population. So we need to be open-minded to say, not to take things so personal that, vaccines save lives. Okay, well, nobody said that vaccines doesn't save lives, but we still need to pay attention to the people that are suffering from vaccines. We still got to be paying attention to the kids with autism whose moms are saying,
right.
My kid got the MMR and then right after that stopped talking. I mean, these moms are not crazy. They're not imagining this. And a mom knows her child, right? So we have to pay attention. I think we do a disservice by covering up the mess that is happening. Okay. So, and I'll tell you, for me, in my opinion, the pandemic was a disaster. It was a disaster on every level. It was a disaster from, why are we playing with microbes and putting them together? Designer microbes, first of all. Yes, I could build a dinosaur, but does that mean I should build a dinosaur?
Right.
Because guess what happened? We got caught. It was a mess, okay? That experiment went wrong. The whole world got to suffer. Millions of people died. And then the solution, so then they covered it up by, we're going to give the solution to everybody. And then the solution was not the greatest either,
right?
Because people were getting COVID. And as much as you try to hide that, you have to be upfront with that. People saw the truth. And the danger in that is that people seeing the truth is that you create a rebellious population that doesn't trust anymore. And now that you've lost the trust, guess what? Even if your drug is amazing for curing cancer, nobody is going to take it. There's this whole talk about the messenger RNA pipeline for cancer. Well, it doesn't matter. You messed it up with COVID. You lied about side effects. It's come forward with it and said, look, we don't know if this is the right answer. We're not going to stop early treatment. We're going to keep early treatment. We're going to give vaccination to those people who believe in vaccination. We're going to watch our population. We're going to do, one continent at a time, and see what happens, But the fact is that when they did a continent at a time and that continent still didn't get out of COVID, that was the first thing that should have been, hey, maybe we did something wrong, right? So instead of covering up, own up to the problem. You know what I mean? Own up to the fact that, yeah, we shouldn't have played with microbes and, joined them together. Yeah, we shouldn't have done one narrative and suffocate the other side. Yeah. Maybe we should have brought the people that saw something else, like me, for example. I saw the microbiome, right? Come to the table. Let's talk about it, right? Get the people that are the most vocal, that are anti, this vaccine, and get the people that are pro the vaccine to talk at a table. That never happened. Instead, they bickered each other. They blocked each other on social media. That's not the way science is supposed to be. Science is about a conversation. Well, I think this happens. I think this happens. Let's do the experiment. Unbiased. Let's see what's the truth, right? And then, but unfortunately, right now, science is controlled by the price of a stock. You've got the stockbrokers that are bidding. They're putting $1 for a stock. They expect that stock to go up to 30. They build up the momentum. They get everybody buying the stock, and then they sell their stock, at $30, a pop. And then they know that it doesn't work, right? We saw that with Moderna and Bill Gates. It didn't work. He took out his money from the stock market. And then guess what happens? The poor guy didn't get the memo that the vaccine doesn't work until 6 months later, and he loses his shirt because now the stock is down. So, it's all a game for some. And unfortunately, I don't play that game. I play the game of research and science.
And I think so many things of what you just said, obviously, I think not only the cover-ups, but when they shut down the world and only allowed certain essential companies to stay open, it's really killed our middle class. So many businesses thereafter. And then what about the ramifications of everyone's mental health thereafter? There's so many more suicides.
Awful.
Right. And then I think
because of that was in a sterile environment. You're keeping these kids that took outdoors,
right,
seeing, mingling. My daughter was one of those kids, and I got her a cat because I'm like, you need to be exposed to some animal because I'm always at work. But it's true. What we are still doing to our kids is criminal, in my opinion.
Agreed. No, I'm right there with you. We isolated for 2 weeks when it was mandated because, sure, we're afraid of this new big monster. And then I'm faith-based and I said, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to live my life. We went out and we literally sat in the parking lot and we would eat outside and let my kids. And so thankfully, my kids have not been as impacted, but I could see it where my youngest son is super affectionate. He would go and hug a young kid and then the kid would freeze like, oh my God, he touched me. It's really sad.
I got microbes,
Right. But the other sad part is I think it's in the people, because I agree with you. I don't think everybody gets hurt by a vaccine, but the subset that does, those are the people that you can learn the most from. So where is our human immune function weak or vulnerable? And that's the population that we can probably learn the most from. And so but instead, these chronically ill are actually more marginalized, but they are the ones that when it doesn't work for them, if we can figure it out for them, then you could figure it out for pretty much the rest of humanity.
And we're gaslighting them, right?
Totally.
Which is so shocking to me because it's the people that are the sensitive that are gaslighting these people, right? So it's on one hand, you want us to be sensitive to all these issues, but then on the other hand, you're not being sensitive to a person who's been hurt by a vaccine, right? Who says, even if it's not, let's say, okay, maybe it's not the vaccine, okay? Even if it's not, you have to be sensitive to acknowledge what they're saying.
Yeah.
I would never, if somebody says to me, I was raped and I'm depressed and I want to kill myself, I'm not going to say, no, you weren't raped. You got to listen to people and you got to say, I'm so sorry. Let me try to help you. but the fact that like these people are coming out with this and they're not getting paid to say this, and they're hurt. I mean, you see the images of, one of the nurses that's on social media went from like being this beautiful model to like losing her hair, to their skin, to all these. And I've seen her microbiome, it's completely in shambles. So, something happened to this woman. Why to this woman and not to someone else?
Right.
We need to know. And that's why I tell even the people that are like, the anti-vaxxers, I say, look, there's two perceptions of the world. Your perception is that it hurts, that it's bad because you see it, that it's caused harm to your friends and family. But to the person that's old, comorbidities, and took it and survived COVID and never got COVID or got mild COVID, they believe that the vaccine worked for them. In a perfect world, you would have the stool samples of all that population, and then you could compare. Did the vaccine, or was it the level of bifidobacteria? Was it the vaccine that killed, or was it the fact that they had no bifidobacteria? So maybe it's all about the bif, right? But of course, I'm also skewed because that's like my baby, right? So, but I try to not be all about the bif, but I see a different reality than most people. I see a microbiome disappearance,
which is really scary. I mean, to be
scary.
really honest,
Like when you look at the African guy who's holding the dung of the elephant and has spirochetes in his gut, right? And then you look at a person in America that doesn't have any spirochetes. Maybe that spirochetes protected. Maybe we killed over generations and generations that spirochete phylum that was so important. Are we killing the actinobacteria phylum, next? And are we killing the bifidobacteria? So, Albert Einstein again used to say, if the bees disappear from the planet, men will have 4 years to live. I say if the bif disappears from the planet, men will only have 4 years to live, because that's the reality that I'm seeing. And if I'm seeing a reality, others need to pay attention to it, because you're seeing it, but you're seeing it in a different level. The chronic disease,
sure.
the rise in cancer. Scott Gottlieb the other day said, oh yeah, we have a rise in cancer, but we can't figure it out. Well, I can. You killed the bifidobacteria. Invasive cancer is linked with zero bifidobacteria. Oh, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, put 2 and 2 together. Follow the bifidobacteria. Loss of bifidobacteria happens in autistic. Is that what happens when I give that antibiotic or that vaccine to the kid? Do I kill the bifidobacteria, and therefore they can't get back up?
Right.
Nobody gave them those probiotics. Nobody gave them vitamins. We kept killing. We kept stressing that kid. We kept exposing him to more viruses, more parasites, more mold. They never get up. They never regain their speech. They become aggressive. They have toxic bacteria going up and down from their gut to their brains. They're banging their heads on the wall. Mental illness goes up. When you look at anxiety, loss of bifidobacteria, bipolar disorder, we just had a paper being accepted by the anxiety meeting. I'm going to be presenting that at the next ILADS. It's a microbiome signature. It starts with loss of bifidobacteria. Alzheimer's, invasive cancer. But here's the problem, because everybody's like, well, bifidobacteria, that means probiotics. Wrong. Now you could try all the probiotics out there. If it heals you, great. You're on the right path. Do it. Continue. And then you can, because it's plan, right? I'm like, don't talk to me. Don't try everything. See 100 doctors, then come see me, right? Because I'm not here to like be that doctor for everybody. You know what I mean? Try. If it works, amazing. You're doing great. If the carnivore diet's working, great. Keep at it. I encourage you. The vegan diet's working, great. I encourage you, because it's all about healing. Heck, even if the placebo is working and it's healing you and I don't have to see you in my office, even better, okay? But here's the thing, because there's a power of the brain to control the body too, that we don't talk about, right? But imagine if you could use your brain to a power that can heal you, that can create a frequency. We haven't even talked about frequencies, right? Because that's the future too. So when you see all that and you say, well, the guy with the probiotics, it helped him, great. But if it doesn't help, we need to do something else.
And in your practice, then, I don't know if you share, but the immunoglobulin amounts, is there a certain amount you recommend, or a certain amount of vitamin C?
don't, because I don't want to have the FDA on me and
Okay. Okay,
looking.
that's fair. Well, people can also, like, here's my logical brain. You can always go on your site and take a look at the supplements you sell, but obviously they won't know exactly how much you're taking in a day. And there's, people just need to be cautious because I don't have as much fancy testing as you. We go by our symptoms, right? So as long as we can help our patient population feel less symptoms so they can live their life, then I call that a win. And if it doesn't work long term, then we try different modalities. And maybe one day they need to get an FMT. I don't know, but it's just
You're doing the art of medicine, right? You're doing what you saw helped you, right? So when I talk too much, I tend to like.
it's because you're
And
passionate about what you're sharing.
I know, and I'm building up my acid, and I'm probably refluxing at the same time. So, anyways, typical GI doctor
I know,
figuring
I
out
love
what.
it. I love it though, because I understand.
Yeah. So, anyways, I get passionate about my field, obviously. But here's the thing, before we had all these fancy tests, what did we do? We listened to the patients.
Yep.
We tried one thing, we tried another. It was trial and error, right? When you become the patient and you become the guinea pig, you start having a different understanding, right? I was the guinea pig on the front line of COVID. I exposed myself to patients. I saw what my bifidobacteria did the whole pandemic, right? I knew when I was immunosuppressed. I knew when I was not immunosuppressed. I knew what killed the bifidobacteria. I knew what increased it because I was doing it on me. So I became the N of one and the guinea pig, right? And that's how science happens, right? That's how you become the guinea pig at the beginning and then you teach others. Like, well, I was the first N of one, like in your case, you did the carnivore diet, it helped you. And like, do this, I can train others, right? That's the art of medicine. It's also divine intervention in that you were given that opportunity to try that and you were courageous enough to try the carnivore diet, right? And so when you do that, you basically, it changes your life, it changes your view, your perception. And then it's like see one, do one, teach one. As an academic doctor, that's what we do. See one, do one, teach one. That's what you did, right? You're basically like, you know what, this worked for me. I'm going to do it on others. And then I'm going to teach others how to do this. And then I'm going to write a book about it because that's how I teach others, right? So that's the art of medicine. Now that can change later. We could discover something else. But here's the problem. What I'm seeing is that because of this corruption and this, capturing of medical science, we've lost the ability to do these discoveries, right? Think about how penicillin was invented, right? It was a petri dish that was left open, and some guy was eating an apple, left it rotten next to it, and the fungus of the apple killed the bacilli, which basically was like, whoa, what happened? A fungus can kill a bacilli? So that's how it was discovered, right? And then some woman came and said, and they couldn't make enough penicillin. So some woman came with these mildewed watermelon and said, hey, here we go. Here's penicillin, right? So these discoveries, imagine if they were censored.
Right.
We would never have had penicillin, okay? And so the discovery of bifidobacteria, if it's censored, we would have never had probiotics. We need to know. We cannot stop science. We got to continue. We got to push the science. We got to be challenging the narrative. To me, the best part of science is questioning science.
Right.
Otherwise, what's the point? Then it's propaganda. Then it's politics, right? If I wanted to go into politics, I would have gone into politics. I would have not gone into science. Science is about everything is a possibility. It's either all right, all wrong, all half right, half wrong. That's science.
Right.
Once we stop and we say, well, this is not science, and there's only one science, well, guess what? That's propaganda. That's politics. You're paid to say that. You're not a scientist.
I totally agree. I think when I first started, because carnivore healed me, I'm like, oh, I found the answer. Everybody just needs to do carnivore. Their microbiome
Right.
will heal. Everything will work, until I started working with the chronically ill. And there was a subset that wasn't getting better or fully better. And then I realized, okay, so I just released that book, and either I have to sit and still say, even though I have a population that's not healing, or and face the music with them every time I see their face on the camera. Or I could say, you know what, the data has changed. Now it doesn't work for a certain, or it's not that maybe it's not that it's diet alone. Maybe it's other things. Maybe it's also stress and the vaccines or other things in your life that are impacting, and it's not just diet alone. And so I started sharing that. Some people got mad at me in the carnivore community. I'm like, I don't care. I can at least sleep at night and not stressing. Yeah.
Support the carnivore community. And you know me, I'm like with the beef initiative, I'm trying to protect the cows from being vaccinated and antibiotics and everything. So I support the ranchers, I support all that. And at the same time, you know, I don't like to see the animals getting killed because, you know, I just, you know, that's my heart and all that. Okay. So I'm confronted as well, you know, in that there's the human side that doesn't want to see an animal being hurt, but then there's also the human side that says, I need to live, you know, and this is the natural progression of life where I need protein and this is my makeup that needs the carnivore diet. But I think, you know, to stay unbiased and to stay, you know, we don't know. We just don't know. And everybody's different is probably the best way. And, you know, when I was asked at the carnivore diet, I was at the farm, Dr. Brooke Miller invited me to speak on the microbiome. And he goes, so Sabine, the carnivore diet is the best diet, right? I'm like, are all humans the same? Right. No. Is the elephant the same as the lion? They're both animals, but yet the elephant is vegetarian and the lion is carnivore. So we're all different. And, you know, there are some people that are lion as humans, and there are some people that are gazelles, and there's some people that are lion, you know, that are elephants, and there's some people that are weasels, and there's some people that are foxes. And, you know, it's just the way the world is made up of. And I think we need to stop looking at ourselves so much as human beings and start looking at others and less about us. And unfortunately, this whole social media movement has been, here's me and let me talk about me. And, you know, enough of that. Focus on the world, focus on the big picture, focus on the fact that you're here one day and you're gone the next. Bring goodness to the planet. Try to leave the planet better than you came in with. You know, we're destroying the planet. I know that I was born in the 60s, and you know, that was probably the last civilization where we had like raw milk on our front porch. We were playing outside. We didn't have cell phones. We had regular phones. We got to see our friends. We got to bike ride. You know, television was just, you know, fun movies. You know, it was I Dream of Jeannie and Fantasy Island and Partridge Family, and that's all gone now. It's all like horror movies and disgusting songs about nonsense, one-liner, and, you know, what are you going to do? You know, it's just completely changed. And I think all that is a repercussion of a diseased microbiome, in my opinion.
No, I'm on the same page with you. I started this whole practice with the gut health being I guess the foundation of our health. And so I that's why I wanted you on. But I wanted to ask you one final question. Alkaline waters are so popular. They say that it's because if your blood is acidic, then it's more cancerous, and, you know, all that. But I know from the gut health that you want your hydrochloric acid, your stomach acid, to be as acidic as possible to break down the foods. But you see all the plastic water bottles that have pH of 9.5. Yeah, I was curious because I should ask a GI doc.
One thing I tell all my patients, get ready. It's on my list. Like I have a 3-page list that I give all my patients. No alkaline water. None. Your stomach is meant to be acidic to protect you from the microbes that you're eating because you didn't wash them properly. Think about that strawberry. I have fields behind me, right? The guy that's picking the strawberries to put it on your kitchen counter. First of all, there's no toilets in the strawberry fields, okay? So let's have that image there, okay? Then you're like, it's being touched by that guy. Then it's being touched by the grocery store guy, then the packaging, then it comes to your kitchen. You're barely washing it, you're eating all these microbes that have gone from the strawberry field to your kitchen table. The only defense is your stomach acid from those microbes, right? And you see it with studies with C. diff, where you have patients that take proton pump inhibitors and then they get C. diff because they've altered their acidity in the stomach. The stomach is your first barrier.
Right.
So you kill off that barrier by giving it alkaline water. Mind you, like, and here's the other problem, as you dump a bunch of alkaline water in your stomach, the kidneys are working harder.
Right.
The lungs are working harder because they're trying to maintain that pH balance. They're going, what the hell am I getting all this alkalinity, right? And also alkaline water is a sterilizer, right? Mm. So why would you want to put that in your gut? It doesn't have any place. You want to have neutral water. And that's what we drank for years. All of a sudden they've messed up they've messed up all these waters are all alkaline water. They have no role. Here's my other pet peeve. Now alkaline water with CBD. Now that's the trifecta.
I've not heard of that yet.
Yeah, well, they're in Malibu. So
okay, makes sense.
I went to the store, which is like a natural cafe, and I'm looking at that and I go, alkaline water with CBD. Great. I wonder what that's doing to the microbiome. So, what can I tell you? People come up with all sorts of things. Nobody really thinks about these foods hurting the gut, but they do. And so when people say to me, well, I took this probiotic and it didn't work. And I tell this to probiotics people as well that have companies. I go, it is possible your probiotic could work, but it is also possible that the person is doing something that's killing the probiotics. So think about the guy that's drinking, 4 glasses of vodka a day, but he's taking his probiotics. Well, doesn't matter. You just killed off with your 4 glasses of vodka, probably the probiotics you took, right? So to everything in life, you got to think of like everything you're doing and putting in your mouth, but it's hard because, a lot of people don't do that. I insist on having my patients give me a diary because I want to know, there's a guy that I did an implant on. He was doing amazing. I mean, he was really sick, was doing amazing after the implant. And a month later, he comes up to me and he's like, oh my God, some of my symptoms are coming back. And I said, well, what did you do? He's like, well, I added this green powder, and I added this protein powder. I'm like, oh, really? And what was it made, the protein powder? And do you know which protein? Was it beef protein or was it like dehydrated worms, right? Turned out it was dehydrated worms, okay? So he realized, he was sold some dud that killed his gut, Same thing with the green powder. It wasn't green vegetables and lettuce dehydrated. It was leaves from the tree, dehydrated, green leaves from the tree. Well, I'm not supposed to be eating green leaves from the tree, last I checked. So, none of those foods are quality, tested. And one of the things, in order to, unfortunately or fortunately, the good thing about having my lab is that I am testing all that. So I give them a 3-page consent protocol, and I say, don't deviate from my diet. And then, of course, patients always call me and why this, why that? Because I did the research. I don't even want to argue with patients anymore. I'm like, follow the diet. If it helps you, amazing. If it doesn't help you, I don't know what to say. You know what I mean? So, and it's like you, right? So at the end of the day, follow the carnivore, what you did. If it helps you, great. If it doesn't help you, we have to look at something else.
Right.
And not everything is cut and dry, and not everything is microbiome, right? Some things are just compression. I had a guy with migraines and I thought it was microbiome at the beginning, but I couldn't really see much in his microbiome of dysbiosis. But it turns out he had a compression in his neck that was causing the migraine. So, the nerve was being pinched. You unpinch the nerve and his migraines disappeared. So not everything is microbiome. Not everything is, neurological. Not everything is vascular. So, there's so many things to disease.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Science is so uncertain what we know now. But I think the overarching thing I've learned is that, resiliency is really key. And if you can make your body stronger, and if your body is already strong, maybe you don't add a bunch of stuff to it, but we do have to be vigilant. Our world is a lot more toxic. And I think yes, it's the junk that we put in our mouths, but I think it's also the junk we put in our minds. I really do believe that what you view and what you think about really makes up your life over time. And so I think all of that matters. And the goal again is less symptoms, better. And however you have to get there, I think that's key.
100%.
So where can people find, like if people wanted to work with you, how does that work? And then I have your book right here. I read it, by the way. So yeah, everyone should get this if you really want to understand digestive health and function. But where can people find you?
They can find me on Progenobiome. So everything's on the website. Our publications are on the website. Our poster presentations are on the website. Your podcast will be on the website. So we update it all the time.
Okay.
I think every Zoom meeting that I do, I give a little hint of what I discover. I think that's research, right? So every day I discover new things. And every day, I'm able to speak about different things. And, we don't live in a world where we can just wait for the research anymore.
Right.
We have to, because unfortunately the publications take months to be approved. And then unfortunately, you can get into problems with retractions and things like that. So regardless, it's important to put the hypothesis out there. It's important to put the work out there because it may help one person,
Right.
and if it helps one person, then we've done a lot, especially, you've definitely heard about the ivermectin, fenbendazole, and it helped 3 people that I know, that Mel Gibson was talking about. There was 2 out of the 3 I know, and I can vouch for that. They received everything, so it's hard to pinpoint what was it that worked. But the fact is it works. And so if it worked, we have to pay attention
Right.
to that. We just can't say, no, this is not good. We have to pay attention because it's the N of 1 that makes us advance science. The N of 1 of fecal transplant was Dr. Einsman doing fecal fleet enemas on patients with fecal material, an idea that he picked up from the 5th century China when they used to give the yellow soup as a treatment for cholera. And basically he did it for patients with C. diff and they improved. That was the N of 2 for him. That started a lot of the, Dr. Barodi doing, hundreds and publishing and thousands and speaking. And then Neil Stolman and telling me about it. And then Colleen Kelly, and then a whole association to now fecal transplant is part of the guidelines of the American College of Gastro. It took 20 years for this to happen, 20 to 30 years actually for this to happen. We cannot stop. If we see something, we've got to be allowed to talk about it. And there's no harm in being wrong in research because you're trying. At least you're trying. Right. We have to try. We have to do better for humanity because right now we're not achieving any cures in anything. So we have to do better.
Well, thank you so much. I love it. I think I could talk to you forever. And I love that you focus on the gut.
Well, by the way, love it. So I recommend it. So impressive.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Next time you publish another paper, please, I'll have to bring you on, and maybe the FDA will one day approve whatever amounts of the IgG and the vitamin C so you could share. But thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Okay, guys, I hope that this conversation really gives you things to think about, especially when it comes to even medicines or vaccines or antibiotics, or even probiotics and supplements and your diet and the things that you bring into your mind and even in your mouth. There's a lot more to what we see that impacts our overall health. If we don't know exactly where the science is leading us, ultimately, we still know that we want our bodies, the terrain of our bodies, the resiliency of our bodies or our microbiome or our immune health to be as strong as it can be. And the goal is to be as robust without any extra stuff. And you can always start with diet because the diet is the foundation of what feeds our body. I hope that this conversation gives you a lot to think about and ways that you can strengthen your overall health. All right, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.